So it is a treat for me to be here. I see some familiar faces and some new faces, so thanks for the interest in Creative Commons and all things open. As Rajiv said, I decided to change up how I give these talks this time and really have it be driven by questions and answers. And in that sense, I'm also inviting you to just shout out any question at any time and not wait to the end. If I mention something that you would like to know more about or that you think, how does that make sense? Just shout out your question, and I'm keen to actually ensure that whatever your interest is in this topic, I actually cover and speak to and help you see it through the eyes that I've come to see it through. So I'm the Associate Director of Global Learning for Creative Commons, and that work, as you can tell from the title, takes me all around the world to talk about Creative Commons and open initiatives and help others put them into practice. But I'm still based here out near White Rock, and so it's a treat for me to come to speak to my own community about this work and encourage its use here locally. So I'm going to kind of drive things from my computer, but and I have a lot of things that I want to show you. So it is Open Education Week, so that's also a special week for all of us in the open world, and it's fun to have an event like this that I can speak to here at Kwantlen. When Rajiv and I were talking about me coming, we kind of wanted it to be a conversation, but a conversation that can address any of these things. So open licensing, open education resources. Some of you are probably involved in the open textbook initiative that BC Campus is leading. And obviously that kind of work is happening well beyond British Columbia. And I'm happy to talk about the bigger picture of that. Some of you are librarians, and in that context, open access from a research perspective is another field where Creative Commons licenses are playing a really impactful role. And there's a lot of things going on around open data, open practices, open pedagogy, and personally I'm doing some work right now around the question that sometimes is in the back of everyone's mind about Creative Commons licenses, which is, if I openly put something out in the world with a Creative Commons license, how am I ever going to financially sustain myself? So I'm actually going to speak a little bit about that too, and if that's a topic you're interested in, I can dig deeper. Okay. So, does anybody have a question like right away? Did you come with a question? If you didn't, that's okay. But if somebody has like a burning question that they really want to make sure gets answered today, I just welcome it right now. Yeah, please.
What have you found has been the major resistance point promoting this? I'm just kind of curious.
I think the biggest resistance is fear. Is how I would put it. It's kind of a different idea, this idea of openly licensing something and putting it out and making it available for others to use. That's not very much how our society currently operates, although I would say in the education context, that is how education has traditionally operated, right? Everything we do in education is based on sharing and building on the work of predecessors. And so it is interesting within the education context that there's also often a lot of fear. But I'll talk more about this particular thing, and if you want, I've actually written something about this very question that looks at all of the what I think of as the concerns that get raised around going in this direction. You can just list them all out as a big honking list of questions that people have, and then I think, you know, I'm happy to speak to each of them if that's something that you'd like to explore. Yeah. But that's my quick response to that.
Well, it's just that from my experience here, which is not very extensive in this area,
yep.
It seems people have strong feelings about it one way or the other.
Yeah.
And kind of no middle ground.
Well, I hope to paint some middle ground today then, because I think there is lots of middle ground, and I think that generally what people fear is somehow being taken advantage of, and I think there's lots of ways by which that can be mitigated. Yeah. Anyone else? We're starting out with a good one. Meaty one.
I'm just wondering also, I don't want to assume that everyone in the group is very familiar with Creative Commons licensing to begin with.
Yep.
So maybe it's useful to maybe just talk about that a little bit, because I think everyone's heard the phrase Creative Commons.
Sure.
But we're not sure, I think,
what it
if that
is.
applies just to creative works, or if somehow, you know, something that's Creative Commons licensed suddenly belongs to the commons. Or
Right. And this is maybe part of your question, really, is, you know, just, you know, when you put a Creative Commons license on something, what does that mean? And am I giving up ownership of that thing? What are other people allowed to do? And I think this is a good spot to start, Rajiv. So, so let me kind of address this. So in general, the Creative Commons licenses apply to anything that can be copyrighted. So that could be music, it could be a book, it could be education materials, anything to which copyright applies. And of course, you know, by law, anything that you create and author and creatively express is immediately by default copyrighted. And anyone else who might want to use that thing has to ask your permission. And in some ways that protects the rights of the creators, but it also, of course, means that the public and other creators who might want to build on that work have to go through a permission-seeking process that can really inhibit innovation and use. And so in the digital context, when it became so incredibly easy to make copies and distribute them for almost $0, Creative Commons came along and offered a kind of middle ground between really the public domain, where everything is in the public domain and no permissions need to be given, you can do anything you want with something, to, you know, all rights reserved, which is the other end of the spectrum where copyright is. And so Creative Commons kind of playing in that middle ground. This is the middle ground that I was alluding to, that we are trying to make opportunities for people who want their work to be used by others, but want to define some permissions and terms around how others can use that work. So one thing that's really critical and important from this context to understand about Creative Commons is that when you use Creative Commons and put a license on a thing, you still own it. You're still the copyright holder. It's still your thing. You're just giving a set of permissions up front and telling people how they're allowed to use it. They don't have to ask you for permission. You're telling them up front what the permissions are. This is actually, I don't usually like to start talks with this, because this is like the legal lawyer part of Creative Commons. Is like, oh, this is so dull in some way, but and I'm not particularly lawyerly, so it applies really to all kind of copyrightable works that can be art, designs, photos, film. Not typically used for software. So when you hear the term open source software, yes, that relates and is similar to what Creative Commons is used for, but typically Creative Commons licenses are not used for software. Open source software as a field existed prior to Creative Commons and has its own suite of licenses. So there's different sets of licenses that operate in a very similar way to Creative Commons, and in many ways Creative Commons was based on those licenses, but software has its own set of licenses. And as I said, the author continues to own the work, and all you're really doing is expressing a set of permissions up front. And this is, you sent me this question too. It's like, right, like the CC, the Creative Commons licenses all have these kind of icons, these logos, and as Rajiv said, it's like a set of hieroglyphics. So, I'm just going to zoom away a little bit and see if we can get all of this in. So here's the full set of icons that you might see being used for Creative Commons. And to help explain the hieroglyphics part of it, I thought I'd show them all and then give you some definition of what they mean. I'll decipher the hieroglyphics for you. I think I decided to include the two at the very top, which aren't really licenses so much as what we call marks. And those two pertain to the public domain. But then all of the rest, starting from CC BY, coming all the way down to this one, are the licenses. And the little circle with CC is our logo, Creative Commons. That's what that means. The little man inside the circle, which you can see on all of the licenses, is the symbol used for attribution. And so that simply says, one of the things that Creative Commons says is that if you license something and anyone else uses it, they have to give you attribution. It's like common standard practice in education that you cite someone else for having provided you with the work that you're using. And we baked that into all the licenses. So all the licenses have the little man on them that require you to give attribution, or anyone who's reusing your work to give you attribution. And then the other symbols mean different things. Let me just see what did I do down here? Just a sec. Oh yeah, okay, never mind. Trying to remember what I did. I'll explain them all. So I'll start at the top with the marks and just come all the way down, kind of explain what each one means. The one that's at the very top, public domain, with the circle through the C being the copyright symbol, that mark is used often by the GLAM sector, like the gallery, library, archive, museum sector, as a mark they put on works that are already in the public domain, right? It may be a painting that was done decades or hundreds of years ago, and they're just making that available as a visual image. It's already in the public domain. They don't need to have any copyright associated with it. You're free to do whatever you want with it. So that's a mark that can be put on to express that something already is in the public domain. The copyright period is over, and anyone can do anything they want with it. The one with the 0 inside the circle, that mark also is for the public domain, but it's a mark that you use if you want to put something directly into the public domain and forget about all copyright associated with it. You can use that mark to put it on a work and say, anybody can do anything they want with this. So that really is the most permissive. Those two really provide the most permissions, because as you can see, there's no little man inside those icons. There's no requirement for attribution. Just free to use it. And the CC0, the last thing I'll say, and then questions, is the CC0 one is used a lot for data. So if you're a researcher, you're doing research and you generate a lot of data associated with your research, if you'd like to publish your research article, it may be under one of the licenses, because that's a copyrightable thing, but the data is usually released under a CC0 license. Please.
Once someone with their own work puts it in the public domain,
yep,
can anyone take it from the public domain and copyright it?
No, no. So it's just out there for a wide use, for any use at all. But no one else can copyright it.
And if they do, this has apparently happened to my son. He put things out in the public domain, and a company from Mexico has claimed as theirs.
And copyrighted it. Yeah, so I mean, so there's no one, I would say that this is a frequent question, sort of like, does Creative Commons have a police force that is out there kind of enforcing this? And no, we don't really. We're just providing a set of tools that work with copyright. So the way it would be handled, if he wanted to handle that and create an issue around it, or is the same way any copyright abuse would be handled. And so then it becomes a legal matter where your son and that entity, you know, there's a contested issue about the use of something, and that's how it's handled. It's just within the typical way in which copyright is handled and abuses to copyright are handled. So there's no CC police force. So coming down the stack then to the licenses, the top license, CC BY, is the license that is the most permissive beyond public domain, meaning that if you put that on your work, you're saying, here's a resource, you can reuse it, you can revise it, you can remix it, you can redistribute it, you can do any of those things. Any of those uses, though, require attribution back to me. So in the context of education, where a lot of us are interested in reputation, it assures your reputation, but it does allow commercial use.
Just a quick question. I know, like, for example, if I'm using an image off of Flickr,
yep,
and it has attribution, but the person who posted it on Flickr just just has some really bizarre username.
Yep.
So that's really all you have to give attribution.
So what I would recommend as a best practice in terms of giving attribution is that the way I like to do it is to give the title of the thing. Even in Flickr, they usually have a title associated with the photo. And I usually also would then, when I list the title, I'd embed a link on that title so that someone who clicks it would go to Flickr and go right to the photo. And then I say by, and the person's name, even if it's a wacky name, I use whatever name they said. But again, I put a link on their name so that if you click on that link, it would go to their photo stream inside Flickr. And then I say licensed blah, blah, blah. CC BY or any of these others that I might say, whatever they licensed it under, because in Flickr you can see exactly what license they use. And I would link there too to the human deed for the license. Okay. So I do title, author, license.
Okay.
And then the next one down with the little arrow in the side of the circle is share alike. This license is very much derived from the software side of things, the open source software licenses. It simply is saying, here's a work, I'm sharing it with you. Again, you're free to reuse, revise, remix, redistribute. If you change it though, in some way, you have to share it back for everyone, including me, under the very same license. So that's what we mean by share alike, is that if you modify it, you have to share it back under the very same license. The next one down with the little circle and the $sign with a slash through it, CC BY non-commercial. So you have to give attribution. You can reuse, revise, remix, redistribute, but not for commercial purposes. So if your aim is to generate money off of that reuse, if someone's trying to generate money off of your work, that wouldn't be allowed. You're essentially retaining the right for generating revenue off of your own work for yourself. And you can see, you can combine that with share alike. So you can say CC BY, non-commercial share alike. So here you'd be saying you can reuse, revise, remix. Can't use it commercially. If you revise it in any way, you have to share it back under this very same license, CC BY NC SA. The next one down, we're getting close to the least permissive now, is CC BY ND. ND stands for no derivatives. So you're saying, here's a work, I've created it, I'm sharing it with you all, you can use it, you can distribute it, but you can't change it. It has to remain in its fixed form, no modifications allowed. And the last license is non-commercial, no derivatives. So that's saying, here's a work, I'm sharing it with you, you can use it, you can't modify it, you can't use it for commercial purposes. So those are sort of a set of permissions across a spectrum, and that spectrum sits between sort of all rights reserved on one side and public domain on the other side. And inside there, we're kind of playing and providing authors with a means to encourage and enable distribution of a work within a set of defined permissions. Yeah?
Well, can I just ask what your thoughts are on the best license used to release education content? Which I know there's quite a debate, isn't there, over
there is.
Licensing. Some people say CC BY is the best to use. Others will say, non-commercial license, perhaps, so people can't take it and profit off it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, I think of this, so we generally advocate for the CC BY license because it enables the most innovative use of the work. And by innovative, when I think of innovative, I think about mixing works together. So there's challenges, you can tell just by even from the permissions I just described, that how you mix works together begins being constrained if you use the least permissive licenses. So if you're interested in a kind of combining works together into an education course or program that are licensed with Creative Commons, the greatest flexibility you would have is from the CC BY license. And it also enables what I think of as the greatest innovative potential around teaching and learning practices. But it also, of course, means that it does allow commercial use, But it doesn't preclude your own commercial use. If you want to sell something and you license it CC BY, go right ahead. There's lots of authors that are putting out work under Creative Commons licenses and still selling those works. And sometimes I find that the commercial use actually could be a new innovative thing that you would benefit from. And so it's sometimes useful to see how it's being used by others. So I advocate for CC BY, but if I had to say, well, I have some reservations about that, I would move to the CC BY SA license next. But if you're really concerned about others commercially using it, I would say in the education context, people have high expectations that their work somehow is very valuable. And I would just say that maybe that's not really the case.
Can you just clarify?
Oh, sorry. Let me do him first. He had his hand up first, and then I'll come back to you.
The non-commercial, sure, like, so someone can take that work, remix it, but they can't sell it, or only the original author can have some kind of a commercial use of that?
So the original author, as original author of any of these, with any of these licenses, you can do anything you want. You, as the original author, you have like, it's still yours. You have complete freedom to do anything. Sell it, license it to someone else, do whatever you want. These licenses pertain to the reuser of the work and what they're allowed to do. So with the NCSA, they would not be allowed to use the work for commercial purposes. That's the first thing. No commercial gain for them. And if they modify the work, they have to share it back, the new modified work, that includes the changes they made, under an NCSA license.
Then at that point,
oh wait, sorry. No, I was going to go here, sorry, first, but
yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, at that point, if someone has modified it and shared it back, you as the original creator can't profit from their work, only the part.
That's right. That's right. Because they've also put the license says NC, and that new NC would also be for you, for the work, for the new work that they've created. Yeah.
I just want to clarify. So we charge tuition here, but we're still considered non-commercial.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah. Yeah. The licenses and so this definition of what constitutes non-commercial, it's like it's a wild discussion, and because you can imagine all kinds of scenarios, right? But in general, what I'll say is it doesn't hinge on what kind of organization you are. You can be a for-profit organization using something that's licensed NC as long as you're using it in a way that doesn't generate commercial gain for you.
Well, that's really good.
Yeah, so it hinges on the use, not the type of organization. And when I was doing this at BC Campus and we were using Creative Commons licenses, it was interesting speaking to legal counsel about this, because if you look at, say, continuing studies, where usually there, or not usually, but there may be a mandate to not only do cost recovery, but something more than that, does that constitute commercial use? I think there's a lot of grayness in this. I think you should just kind of use common sense, is maybe the way I would put it. And I know from speaking to legal counsel about this that they always imagine the worst possible thing. You know, they imagine the worst case, the most disastrous thing possible, and then they try to protect you from the risk associated with that. But in general, what we're seeing is that people respect the non-commercial. Other questions? Yeah, please.
Just similar to what that question was, so the buy share alike though, so if I pick up a work that is buy share alike, I'm making changes and share it back, and then that person could profit of it though, right, of the changes?
Absolutely, yeah. And so could you. So if you look at Wikipedia, Wikipedia is by SA. That means that anyone can take stuff from Wikipedia and create a business around it. They have to share back whatever any modifications they might make to Wikipedia content under the same license, but they can use it for commercial purposes, absolutely. So you see some businesses like trying to create wiki travel services that draw on the rich assets inside Wikipedia that talk about different countries and cities and sites to see. All of that's actually allowed. So this is not so much, you know, part of this is about, I was once asked by the Canadian federal government, like, how does Creative Commons stimulate the economy? It can, actually, right? I mean, we're talking about making resources available for other people to use. And though if we're not precluding commercial use, then that actually opens up a whole pile of opportunities for people to leverage these resources in interesting ways. And so let me kind of move on to show you some, well, so yeah, maybe I'll show these quickly. So here's the Creative Commons website. And actually, I'll go to the home page. So here's the Creative Commons website, but there is a menu called Licenses. And if you really want to know more about the licenses, you can go to About the Licenses. And there's a whole page that talks about the licenses, what the original rationale was for them. It talks about the licenses in a digital context as having these 3 layers of legal code. Human readable deed and machine readable. I'm not going to go into all of that. It's interesting, but it's a bit dry and I want to keep you awake. But here's like the full description of every single one of the licenses, and you can go and look at the full legal, lawyerly description of that license or the simple human readable deed that anyone could read and understand. So I've clicked on CC BY, and immediately you can see you're free to share, copy, distribute, you're free to adapt for even purpose, any purpose, even commercially, but you have to give attribution. So that's pretty plain, simple language that people can understand, and so that might help if you really want to dig into this deeper. And I would also say that I wanted to also just point out that all of these icons are on our website too. So these buttons and marks and icons we make available, because typically people use them to put on the work that they're Creative Commons licensing. And I just wanted to point out too that I use the ones up at the top, but there's also these sort of abbreviated versions of them that are in icon format across the bottom. And sometimes when you're going through a site, you'll see that they use these versions rather than the full ones up above.
How does versioning work in terms of the various licenses? We're now in version 4.
Yep. Yeah, so the licenses have versioned over time, and the license version we're using now is version 4. It actually took us 2 years to do version 4. And the big thing that historically happened over versioning of the licenses was around localizing the license to work in a particular country. Because copyright law, as you move around the world, changes. And so we would have version 2 or version 3 of the license, and then we'd have to port it and adapt it, customize it a little bit to work in each particular country. But the 2-year process of creating version 4 created a license that works the same everywhere around the world. So the big benefit of the version 4 license is that it's applicable and the same everywhere.
But when I pick up an item from 2010 that's under version 2 or something like that, how is it kind of moving forward with what you may or may not be able to do, that you may have changed?
Well, yeah, so in the earlier versions of the license, depending upon where the author lived, they would choose the version of the license that's relevant to their country. So there was country-specific versions of each of the licenses. And so when you, let's say, find a work and it's been licensed with version 2, they usually are linking to the version 2 license they used, and it would be the one that's specific to their country. So one of the other things we've been doing is all of these licenses are available in many languages around the world, and the human readable deed has been translated into umpteen languages. So we have like a huge effort internationally around creating global versions of these licenses. Yeah?
About registering. I've slapped CC licenses on some of my works, and I never bothered to actually register, and I should know this.
Yeah, you don't have to register. There is no registry process. And of course, that's also the case with copyright, right? The way copyright works right now, you basically are the copyright holder as soon as you create something new and put it out into the world. There's no need to register. There used to be, historically, there used to be. And there currently is some call to reinstate like some people would like to see copyright law amended so that by default it's not copyrighted unless you register it and deliberately copyright it. But currently, everything is copyrighted no matter what. The default is closed, essentially. And with the Creative Commons licenses, we don't have a registrar. There's never been a requirement to register. But we are actually thinking about creating some services around a registry. So if you wanted to register your work and have us, let's say, track metrics around where it goes and how it's used and how many downloads, and that might require it to be in a registry with a unique ID number on it that could be tracked. So in the future, we may create a registry with a set of services associated with it. I should also say that everything on the Creative Commons side is free, although you can see we have donations all the time. That's one of the ways that we survive ourselves as an organization.
Oh,
yep.
The questions are quite sophisticated, but they're also quite technical, and I'm just wondering if we take a step back for a moment. If I, as a staff member, as a faculty member, want to share my work, I mean, I get this is a language that we can communicate intent and permissions with, but if I just pop it on my website, it's available, it's accessible for free, what benefit is it to me for formally adopting any of these licenses?
Yeah, I think the big benefit is around most of the people that I work with and speak with around this space are interested in having their work be seen, be accessed, be used. In education, we're basically trying to create works. We ourselves are creating works that build off the shoulders of the giants that came before us. And in the education context, we're usually interested in having our work be out so that others can also see and adapt and build on that. So I think there's access. There's, for you as the author, I think there's a reputation piece, which is not to be diminished. That can be quite significant. Some of the initiatives that I'll talk about in a bit are basically building the reputation piece in very significantly trying to track to what extent did CC licensing a work result in me being invited to conferences, to me being invited to participate in collaborative working groups around a particular domain that I'm focused on, and so on. There's a whole bunch of things there that you could think of as the equivalent of citations in a research context. And when I spoke I guess it was last year, I was speaking to people at UBC who were doing a MOOC, and they wanted the videos that were in their MOOC to be Creative Commons licensed. And their interest, I thought, was really interesting. They wanted to see the videos used in high school by teachers in high school. They were about physics, I think it was. And yeah, so the interest in seeing it be reused in that context, and also attracting students to UBC to take their course if they should go from high school onto UBC. Anyways, I think there's a variety of things there.
I know for me, I'm much more likely to use a work that's been just declared right up front, go right ahead.
Yeah.
Then I have to track somebody down.
It certainly relieves a lot of permission-seeking time, right?
There's a bit more of a technical question though.
Yeah.
On that, on the licensing. So, if the original work, somebody remixed it, gives attribution, yet another person comes in to the second one that's already been amended. It's like how far do you go with that?
As far as everywhere, just like you would on research, right? So if your work is revised by someone else, they are citing you, and then if you revise their work, you cite them. So there definitely is a historical trail that you really should track. And I've never really seen a work that's actually gotten like so complex that it's unmanageable. But in practice, I would be saying that you should be showing the whole progeny of its evolution over time.
Because I've seen one, there was attribution in one of the ones to 3 different people, so they had to combine things.
It gets complicated. Yeah, it can get complicated. Yeah. Okay. And I'll talk more about the benefits, Rajiv, I think, but I wanted to Rajiv asked me to speak to the NC and D clauses, but to be honest, I thought it might be interesting to actually see real examples of each of the license out in the wild. So what I did was take some time to put the license and then several works that actually use that license out in the world. So something that is just explicitly out in the public domain. You know, the LibriVox free audio book collection is an interesting example. These are books written by authors that are, you know, the copyright period is over, they're in the public domain, and LibriVox is an initiative where people have done the audio reading of that book and recorded it and are making it available as an audio book. So all of these books are using here you can see the use of the Creative Commons license right here on this book. So they're making use of, so Moby Dick, public domain mark, or things like silent movies are also often out in the public domain now. And so this image from the Charlie Chaplin silent movie Safety Last has also been licensed. It's already in the public domain, and they're using the Creative Commons public domain mark to signal that it is in the public domain, meaning it's, you know, these marks are really intended to communicate to you the freedom to do something with it, which I think is an incredible freedom. And it's nice to have a mark that tells you what freedom or permission you're given. And so I just wanted to show, I just thought it'd be useful to see some actual use cases, because it's one thing to talk about the technical blah blah blah, it's another thing, I mean, the important technical considerations. But it's another thing to see how people actually used it. So here's another example of a work that's in the public domain. This is Bach's Open Goldberg Variations. It's available as a free download. This was actually an interesting one in that it was funded by a Kickstarter campaign, funded Kamiko to record the Bach Goldberg Variations, and as part of the Kickstarter campaign there was a commitment to put it out under the Creative Commons 0 license. So in this case it's Kamiko saying to the world, I'm actually the copyright holder, but I'm putting this recording out into the public domain. You're free to use it in any way you like. So that's the CC0 mark. So we're sort of making our way down the stack. In Europeana, Europeana is like a big cultural institution in Europe that acts as a source for all kinds of historical images from a variety of collections of institutions across Europe. And what they put out in what they used for the CC0 public dedication mark was the data sets associated with their collection. So if you think about essentially the library cards associated with work, those cards, the data on those cards, in this case Europeana, essentially released the 20 million records they have in their collection of historical works. They released the data under a CC0 mark. I should go faster, otherwise we'll be here all day. I'll go quicker. I won't show all of them. CC BY, I'll show these. Well, actually, all of them are kind of interesting. CC BY, open textbooks. These are open textbooks from OpenStax. Here's the psychology one that Rajiv. So if you haven't seen an open textbook, have a look. This is like a CC BY licensed textbook, meaning that students, faculty, free to use, free to revise, free to remix. If you want a print copy, you have to still pay, but it's essentially just the cost of the book. And the quality of these books is pretty high. I brought one myself from a different collection. I was in Australia last year and was given this open textbook on the secrets of Asian sports psychology. Also CC BY, but you look at these books and you go, you know, if you have issues, if you think that there are issues around what the quality of these Creative Commons licensed resources are, I think things like seeing real examples put those issues to bed. So these are CC BY examples. I also like this example. This is that's an example of a teaching resource. This is an example of research. So the entire Public Library of Open Science, which is a research journal, they've published 140,000 plus peer-reviewed articles. They've had 11.6 million views, 1.9 million articles downloaded every month. All of those articles are CC BY licensed, meaning that the public gets access to the research that it funded. Anyone can read those articles. It's not paywall blocked, where you have to pay first before you can read it. And you can download it, reuse it, build on top of it. So this is a research example. So we're getting teaching examples, research examples.
Yeah. I was going to say that, piggybacking on the comment you made earlier, in fact, there's a fair bit of research itself that looks at the dramatically increased citation counts for articles that are CC BY licensed.
Absolutely, yeah. Way more than any other.
Impact on your field.
Yeah. I mean, I like what John Festinger is doing in his work at the University of British Columbia. He teaches video game law. And his whole course, all this, here's his whole course, and it's all licensed CC BY. Please.
Are all these links available?
Oh, sure, I can, it's just a Google Doc. I'll send Rajiv the Google Doc if you want, and you can access and use it however you like.
Yeah, we can send the link out to everyone who registered for the event that I need.
Sure. Okay, so that was CC BY. Here's some, I mentioned Wikipedia already, so I won't go and look at them, but they use CC BY SA, that's share alike. Here's a really different example. So here I'm actually starting to share some of the work that I've been doing around business models. I spoke to Arduino recently. Has anybody heard of Arduino? A few people. So they use CC BY SA. They're very interesting. Arduino makes essentially electronic circuit boards that perform all kinds of things and have software associated with them. The boards are designed schematics, and the schematic for the board is openly licensed CC BY SA. The software associated with the board is actually licensed with an open source software license, and I won't go into their business model, but essentially they make money by selling the board. But if I go down and look at, let's say, the schematic for that board, on the schematic, they say right here, so this schematic is released under a CC BY attribution share alike license, meaning that you're actually free to, like if you like that board but you want to customize it, you've got your own innovative idea on how to take the LilyPad electronic circuit board that they've designed and add some cool new thing to it, go right ahead. This isn't locked down as some sort of patent that no one else can change or even see. Here they're making it completely visible. You can see everything that's associated with the electronic circuits of that board. It's a bit of a mind-blowing thing after a while when you start thinking about how much stuff is being shared. CC BY non-commercial. So this might be used by someone like Jonathan Mann, who's a musician. This is another person I interviewed recently. He releases his music under a CC BY non-commercial license. So he's very interested in having his music listened as widely as possible by people everywhere around the world, but he wants to reserve the right from a monetary gain point of view to himself. So if I click on, he's famous for writing a song a day. Have anybody? Jonathan Mann writes a song every single day and has for years. And so all of his songs he puts up online here on Bandcamp. And then if you come down here, you can see here he's licensed it CC BY non-commercial. Open Desk is another really interesting example. This is a company, a business that makes furniture. They've brought together furniture designers from all around the world, and the designers create the design in software, and they put it up on Open Desk under a CC BY CC BY, what am I on? I'm CC BY, non-commercial share alike, I think it is. And then, so you're free to download the design for the furniture. Let's say it's a desk. I like the design of that desk, but I want a smaller version. You can take their design file, customize it, and make a smaller desk for yourself and have it made. They have a very interesting model in that the designs, their idea is global designs, localized manufacturing. So instead of a factory that makes all this furniture and has to warehouse it and then ship it around the world to whoever wants to buy it, they globally aggregate the designs and have them available under Creative Commons licensing, allowing for customization. And then if you want to actually buy any of these pieces of furniture, they match you to someone who makes furniture in your region. So here in Vancouver, there is a CNC operator, so computer numerical, whatever that stands for. And they actually will cut that furniture that you pick out for you and give you essentially like the IKEA kit of parts that you then use to make that furniture locally yourself. Anyway, it's very, very interesting. I should go faster. Questions? Yeah, please. Go ahead.
For that one, if someone wanted to start a furniture business and start manufacturing furniture, that's a non-commercial license.
Non-commercial license, that's right.
So they couldn't sell that furniture?
That's correct. That's correct. Yeah, and what's interesting is that the designs are being made available under a CC BY non-commercial license, meaning you can change them. And so I could custom design that desk and get it, I could make it myself for free. But if I want to actually have it made for me and take it to a CNC cutter here in Vancouver, and there's actually several of them, that's where it begins to cost, right? So the manufacturer, the cutter here in Vancouver, would need to pay for their time and materials to make that furniture, and then Open Desk actually puts a percentage fee on top of that to pay the designer and themselves. That's their business model. It's a very clever model, actually. I actually have, I picked out a piece of their furniture, and I ordered it, but it turned out you have to buy two. So if anyone's interested in joining me on buying one of their tables, let me know. So I'm on to non-commercial share alike. So Cards Against Humanity. Anyone played that? A pretty outrageous game. So this is a card game. A pretty outrageous card game. What they say, a party game for horrible people. This game, you can download for free under a Creative Commons non-commercial share alike license and print it out yourself, cut the cards out. You're good to go. You can even modify the game if you want, but of course you have to share it back. And then if you actually want to buy like the pre-made set, then they provide you with a means of doing so. Is this good? Okay. Cory Doctorow, a pretty famous science fiction author. He has his site Crap Hound. So here we're talking about like a professional author, right? This is someone whose livelihood is writing and selling books. And so he makes all his books available under a CC BY non-commercial share alike license. So if I go to Down and Out in the Magic Kingdom, let me see. Oh, cool.
When in May? We'll talk about May 11th.
So if I want to download the ebook, I can actually look at an HTML file version of the ebook. So here we can see, like, he's still claiming copyright, right? So you're not giving up copyright. You're still the copyright holder. But if I scroll down a little bit here somewhere, yeah, he's making this book available here under the terms of a Creative Commons license, blah, blah, blah. So, here it is. So by NCSA. And you can see some people, even though I promote the use of those icons, because I think the icons are very visual and communicate quickly, some people just do it through text and just link back to the license. Okay, that's NCSA. No derivatives, the ND. This is really the question Rajiv asked me to answer. You can tell I'm answering something bigger. But so this is the one that doesn't allow changes. No derivatives. And I think this example is really cool, and I did want to talk about this example with you guys because this is a very interesting initiative. Has anyone heard of the conversation? This is an example. I just finished interviewing them a couple of weeks ago. It started in Australia. It's essentially a journalism initiative looking at the issues around the declining newspaper industry. The conversation emerged as a new kind of journalism, a new kind of online newspaper. And here's their model. They identified that universities and colleges and educational institutions have a vast body of expert faculty with tremendous subject matter expertise and knowledge. And that subject matter expertise and knowledge tends to get communicated in courses and in research articles, but not very well, generally, to the community at large. Just your ordinary person, your lay person, either in your regional community or in the broader community. And so their model is they actually have married and paired up editors, professional editors, with educational institution faculty. The educational institutional faculty write the articles about contemporary news stories and of course are picked to write those articles based on their own personal subject matter expertise, and they work with a professional editor to publish that in the conversation. And the conversation now has issues in many different countries around the world. So here we're looking at the issue from Australia, but there's issue that's covering contemporary news stories in France, the United Kingdom, and the United States. And there's currently, I think, a research grant at UBC to some faculty who are looking at creating an edition of the conversation for Canada. Anyways, all these articles that are written by people like you or faculty at educational institutions, they're written in a way that, of course, is perhaps more simplified than how a research article would be written, because it's really written for lay people, but it's intended to kind of convey that subject matter expertise of a faculty person, and they're written and shared completely with a Creative Commons no derivatives license. I'm not sure, well, one of the things I'll say is that many of these new initiatives start out with some of the more restrictive licenses, and then over time, as they get comfortable, they migrate to the more and more open licenses. And I wouldn't be surprised if that happens with the conversation. And then the least permissive one, non-commercial, no derivatives. I thought I'd use this example. There aren't actually a lot of examples of this particular license, but this one is interesting. This is Teach AIDS. As you know, AIDS has been like a serious medical crisis, health crisis around the world for a long time. And so a group created a set of materials, including videos around teaching AIDS, and the materials are all sort of led by this woman right here, Pia Sokar. And the materials are available in many different languages and are used all around the world and are licensed CC BY, non-commercial, no derivatives. And you can imagine the no derivatives part perhaps is important in the health context, right? You don't necessarily want to allow materials that are about improving health to be revised if that revision results in something that's no longer accurate.
Just want to mention, that's the license we use here at Colony for our repository called Cora, for the people who are contributing works that they have the copyright for.
Okay.
And we offer the option to to choose a more liberal Creative Commons license, and nobody so far has. So I think right now the comfort level, not that there's a huge number we're talking about, but the comfort level right now is
Sure.
people not feeling comfortable with commercialization.
Yep. Who would possibly commercialize them? Who would?
The thought of changing, like, since no derivatives, people don't really want their article to be.
Yep. Okay. Fair enough. I mean, and when I first started doing, this goes back like OER and the Online Program Development Fund in British Columbia, we also noticed the same thing, right? We had actually at that time the BC Commons and then Creative Commons. And BC Commons was like restricting sharing to the province of British Columbia. Initially, that's what people chose. But over time, it migrated more and more to be more open. And after 9 years, we basically eliminated the BC Commons completely. So I do think of it, you know, the licenses, you can think of them as like stepping stones. It's easier to go more open. You can't go more closed, because once something has been licensed as openly, it's out there. So in general, non-commercial, you know, you're reserving commercial use to the original author, which is maybe appropriate if they're wanting to reserve all revenue generation solely for themselves. And no derivatives appropriate for safety, mission critical kinds of content. This isn't always the message open advocates want me to present to institutions, but I think this is really what's happening in the world. Like, we're advocating for CC BY. We think CC BY is the innovative license that generates the greatest benefits to the institution, to the author, and to the students. But we're also realistic about where everybody's at and think that the spectrum offers some interesting choice. All right, so yeah, this was going back to the question about benefits, right? So I jotted down a few points. I'm actually not going to just show anything in answer to this, but this is like, what is the benefit? If I create something and I just email it or put it up on the web and it's like anyone can go look at it, why would I also openly license it? And I really think there is this really important distinction between free. It may be free and accessible, but technically, if anyone wants to reuse it or modify it, they have to come and still ask you for permission, especially if it goes beyond what fair use allows for. But really, the benefits of going more open are, in my view, the sharing and building on others' work is just fundamental to education. If we don't do that, education is less than what it could be. And I think that when we share and allow others to openly look at our work and consider modifying it and using it themselves, especially for teaching and learning materials, we're essentially migrating that practice that's already in place around research to educational content. We're essentially taking a practice that already exists within educational institutions and migrating it to curricular materials, which typically have never been, no one ever gets to see. And I think that it's a natural thing for us to look at the quality improvements that might come from a peer review and a peer collaboration process. Because openly licensing also invites others to remix and revise and share back with you. And it can become kind of like a reciprocal peer collaboration process. It also means that people can localize things. I know in the BC Campus Textbook Initiative here, Open Textbook Initiative, you know, maybe started with a US open textbook and then localizes it with examples that are more pertinent to a Canadian context. That's awesome. That makes it a way better textbook for use here than the US version. You could also imagine it being translated, and there's lots of translations of open resources happening around the world. And because someone can reuse and remodify it, it can be kept current. Like, lots of textbooks are out of date, especially in fields that change quickly. And so the opportunity to actually make something up to date, it's really awesome. Reputation we spoke about. Some institutions are actually in their course catalog indicating which courses are using OER or are made up of OER. And it obviously lowers the cost for students, but it also potentially creates some really innovative teaching and learning potentials. And when you look at student enrollments, which courses do you think they enroll in first? they enroll in the OER-based courses. And so it can be used as a means to attract students. I think there's some awesome innovation things that are starting to happen. And clearly there's sort of the reduced cost, not reinventing the wheel over and over again aspect of this.
The corollary to that in terms of the students choosing those courses is kind of building the work that Rajiv and his colleagues have been doing around the quality of the resources and the quality of the teaching that's going on in those. It's not just a way for you to save $75.
Absolutely. And I think that that's going to become the factor. It'll be, yes, it's nice to save some money, but that course is way more impactful and engaging, and I've learned way more than I have through perhaps the way that another example of that very same course is taught. And the extent to which the open resource can trigger pedagogical innovation, I think is a really exciting opportunity. And I think I might have something later on talking about that, but I'll just take a minute now to say that we shouldn't just think about these like an open textbook as just simply merely replacing a traditional publisher's version of that book. We should think about, because it's open, can I teach this differently than I can with a closed resource? And to what extent can I engage the students in leveraging the open aspects of remixing and revising and improving that book as part of the way that I'm teaching? And there's some awesome examples of people doing that, right? So ChemWiki at UC Davis, you know, the faculty members developing a chemistry textbook, open textbook. The students for marks have to improve that book. And their improvements are, you know, obviously marked before they're incorporated into the book to be deemed appropriate. But then the students begin to be co-producers, co-creators of the educational material and produce something that has a long-lasting legacy well beyond their own enrollment as a student. There's more and more examples like that.
Well, I'm just thinking it's kind of created quite a bit of controversy too.
Oh, okay.
Because I know we've talked about putting Creative Commons, but then, you know, is that shaming the faculty that are using Creative Commons? That's kind of sometimes the feel, and I just, do you have any good advice for people that get faced with?
Well, you don't want to be shaming anybody, right? Right.
Not shaming, it's just a different way.
Yeah, yeah.
There's a lot of nerves around that, and we've had some here too.
I think that, I mean, what I've seen as effective in the past is that faculty like to hear from other faculty, and not so much always from someone like me who's coming in as an advocate, right? And I think that the way I see this rolling out, I mean, historically this is rolled out as like early adopters like Rajiv who get interested in it, you know, try something, they get excited about it, and the extent to which they can talk about what they're doing and influence their peers is really a nice gradual way of getting more people involved. He doesn't have to shove it in everyone's face. I don't think he does that.
No, I think from my perspective, the key phrase is academic freedom.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, anytime that's perceived as being under attack, you'll get a lot of reactance, a lot of pushback. But I think framing it in a true way, which is, I think the way in which faculty normally operate is one in which we surrender a layer of academic freedom without really knowing that we're doing so. I think by traditionally bending our courses to map onto the structure of a textbook, instead of modifying resources to map onto our pedagogical goals, and sort of introducing this as a new layer of academic freedom, one that really hasn't been explored, and absolutely respecting the instructor's choice. Yeah. But again, in my experience, simply putting the resources in people's hands results in about 40% of them adopting it, suggesting that part of it is just this notion of, you know, myth of what the resource could possibly be.
Yeah, I really like that way of framing it. As, I mean, I do think the open actually increases academic freedom, and that's usually a very compelling, that's not an in-your-face thing, that's a kind of ethos that's part of education that everyone relates to. I liked this from OECD as a way of kind of framing the open education resource part of this. These are sort of the ways in which OECD as an organization sees the benefits. Yes, okay, we may be generating cost savings both to students and to the institution, but we're also, by a peer review process and making the resource open, improving its quality. We're enabling wide and broad distribution of the resource. We're reducing barriers to the learning resources and to learning in general. But more excitingly are these top two in the top right. The potential to create new forms of learning and the potential for teacher collaboration. I think those are the two big ones from my point of view. I think that part of the alleviating the kind of conflict piece is looking at it as an opportunity to collaborate with professional peers, is a kind of move away from the Lone Ranger model of course creation to a more collaborative model where you try to collectively create something that's better than you could perhaps do on your own. Well, so one of the things I was asked to speak about was some specific examples of institutions benefiting from going open. And as this work and field has evolved over time, it's changed from learning objects that Steffi and I remember from the old days, which little tiny pieces of courses, to, you know, more to textbooks, to full courses, and now to full degree programs. So Tidewater Community College has been very interesting to watch and speak with them about their work. Actually, their VP of Academic is going to be in Cape Town with me in the coming week, talking about their work and trying to advance their work. But they decided to create a complete degree made up of OER. So all 21 courses that are associated with an Associate of Science degree program in Business Administration are open resources. And so this was in some ways the first big example of an entire degree made up of OER. And they got a lot of press out of it. I won't show all this, but they've now moved on to taking that model of a full degree program and are now implementing it across the entire Virginia Community College system. So they're going to have what they call Z times 23, which will be 23 different Z degrees at different institutions across the whole system. So here we have an example of really a system that started out with the idea of going open and applied it to a complete degree program, which is then subsequently spread across the whole system, and then just recently actually Achieving the Dream. So these are US examples, I acknowledge, but Achieving the Dream announced a whole initiative around being willing to fund other institutions across the entire country in adopting these OER-based Z degrees, and are providing a whole set of funding and technology assistance associated with that development and implementation of Z degrees. And so the notion of being able to not just think about open resources as a textbook, but as a complete set of courses comprising an entire degree has really been a huge win for this particular institution and for the system as a whole, and is now spreading quite a lot across the whole US system. I'd love to see something like this in Canada. I think that we have the opportunity to look at Z degrees, Z creds. And so I'd love to see Kwantlen do that.
So would I. I just want to point out that the Achieving the Dream call for funding for developing Z degrees is restricted at the moment to two-year institutions, or at least two-year programs, even within institutions, four-year institutions, as long as they don't have a two-year community college in their catchment area, in their population. I'm happy to say that they've explicitly stated that Canadian institutions are permitted to apply, and that application deadline is about a month from today. So I encourage people to look at that. It's 3-year funding, about $100,000 US, which is
So this is talking. We've started the conversation.
Oh, wow.
We'll see. Yeah, like it's real preliminary, but she's really excited about it, and our VP provost is excited by this concept in general. So we'll see if we get our act together before April 8th. That's a big initiative for
Yeah, I think that, like, I'm just going to quickly show something from this, because they do a really good job of showing the program's successes. So they had not only cost-saving successes from the Z degree, but learning outcome successes, access successes, student success, satisfaction successes. And so they actually are generating metrics about each of those kind of aspects of impact that the Z degree has had. And I think that showing some metrics, that some data in a sense, that back up this notion of it being beneficial is really, really persuasive. And I think a good thing to consider if you're planning an application, how you would do that.
So would it be a benefit to a two-year institution for offering that? Because the student comes in, gets their degree and leaves.
Sure.
Stick around for the next few years.
I mean, I think that, well, so I would encourage you to check out what they are showing here in terms of the benefits associated with why you would consider doing that. It isn't, there's multiple impactful benefits associated with this, not just students staying around and persisting as an ongoing student forever. So, and I also think that the starting was small, and then I think we'll see like 4-year degree programs also start to consider this as a model for their initiatives as well. I think, yeah, I'm actually going to, I want to jump down, I'm going to jump down for a minute here to talk about this one just briefly. So the question was, if an institution is starting to think about launching an OER initiative, either big or small, you know, what should they think about? Well, so I'm going to say, try to think about being bottom up, like having faculty who really are enthused and engaged in this and want to do it, with some top-down support as well. So you need your president and your VP to be backing this kind of notion and being willing to support it. I think that the open part affects the whole development process and really ought to involve faculty, librarians, and instructional designers and deans and so on, all working collaboratively together around this. You're definitely wanting to look at what exists already and how can we make use of it. And that leads you into how do you source OER, how do you evaluate it from a quality point of view, how do you revise and remix it. I also think that, you know, these are a whole set of practices here around students authoring new OER. That's kind of a whole different kind of kettle of fish that some people may or may not be ready for, the whole opportunity, but at the same time fear around sharing, even where do you store it, how do you curate it. Talked briefly already about open pedagogies. But I wanted to just talk about this particular initiative that I've been actually going to zoom in on this a bit. So in the US, the Department of Labor 4 years ago, when the US economy was in the tank, they received $2 billion to invest in encouraging the community colleges all across the US to create what they call stacked and lattice credentials that would move people who were unemployed into an education and training program that would lead to them being employed in a high growth, high wage job sector. Very kind of applicable to a kind of community college and a vocational kind of school. And I wanted to include this because in my view, it's not enough to just think about doing a Z degree or start thinking about doing OER. I really, really encourage you to think about the strategy. Why do it? What is the purpose? What would be the outcome beyond just sort of innovation and getting people to be more open? And in this context, the Department of Labor, in their grant program, so they released like $500 million of grants once per year over the last 4 years. If you accepted a grant, you had to agree to Creative Commons license all of the new curricula you created. And so here they tied the open licensing requirement to a really important strategic thing that was thought of for the whole economy of the country. Like, I wish that kind of thinking was happening here in Canada, but I would encourage you, even at an institutional level, to kind of think about it from that lens as well. Not just how do we get faculty to do this, but like if we were to think about the strategic, direction for our institution, how might we make open tie to that and help that, enable that, make it possible to do that in a way that wouldn't be possible otherwise. So so I actually, so the Department of Labor got all this money and made this a requirement for all the grantees, but of course the community colleges, most of them had never heard of open education resources or Creative Commons. And so we got a grant from the Gates Foundation, and I've been helping the over 700 community colleges all across the US figure all that out. And I would say that like they're starting to get really excited. They're past the fear stage and starting to think about, oh, you mean I can actually join forces and form a consortia? Like the five big high growth job sectors in the US are health, so healthcare, energy, IT, transportation, and manufacturing. Those are the five big. So when you look at the grants that have been made to these colleges, they're mostly in those areas. So again, even though they're making OER, they're doing that, the state of Virginia is creating courses on health. The state of Washington is doing, they don't necessarily talk to each other. So to what extent can you get them to talk to each other about what curricula are you creating? And even because the program rolled out once per year over 4 years, the round 4 grantees right now can actually look at the work that round 1 grantees produced in the sector that they're developing and think, because it's all openly licensed, they can actually start to reuse that and build on it. And that's pretty exciting for some of them. And we're starting to form communities of practice and consortia of institutions who all are pursuing curricula in a particular sector to try to help them coordinate that development and subsequent improvement and sustainability of the initiative over time going forward. It's pretty exciting work, actually. And the other thing that they did, which I thought strategically this is like a really cool initiative that I think could be modeled and replicated. But, so let me just say a few more words about it, just because it's interesting strategically. The money was given to the community colleges, but they had to partner with employers and industry. They couldn't do the curricula development on their own. They were mandated to work with industry partners who would identify what are the skills and knowledge associated with the high growth jobs that we're trying to hire for, and then create curricula that ensures the skills and competencies associated with that are taught. And they also had to work with the public workforce system just to even determine what are the high growth jobs in our particular region. And they had to get data to prove that there really was an opportunity associated with that. And then the Department of Labor asks for evidence-based design, stacked and lattice credentials, meaning that you have credentials that stacked or lattice with each other so that you can enter a program, complete it, exit, and then come back later and take another additional credential and kind of build your way up to higher and higher levels with multiple entry and exit points. They wanted it to be transferable and articulate. They wanted to see online and tech-enabled learning, and it had to have strategic alignment. Anyways, a very, very complex program on one level, but a powerful strategic use of openness. And in the context of what an institution might need to think about in terms of getting going with OER, and here I'm really talking about open initiatives at scale, right? I'm talking about big initiatives, not small ones. Another particular area that I think we're starting to receive a lot of attention is around policy. And so I just recently helped and worked on the State Board for Community and Technical Colleges in Washington, who developed a whole set of videos that feature experts talking about how open policy works at both the government and institutional level. So this is actually a friend of mine, Hal Plotkin, who was an advisor to Obama and implemented the policy behind that Department of Labor program. And so it's really interesting to hear him and others talk about policy. I think that's one particular thing. And then another big thing has been the importance of finding those resources. So if you look at $2 billion being distributed to the community colleges to create curricula, when they create that curricula and openly license it, where the heck do they put it? And how will anybody ever find it? And so all that content is being put into Skills Commons. And this is like a centralized repository, if you will, for the deliverables coming out of that program. And anyone can go and browse. And I like this way of browsing. You can actually browse by industry sector. So if I mouse over any of these, so this segment is health, and it even tells me the NAICS code, the National Industry Classification Code for that particular area of health. And so you can actually browse all the resources in Skills Commons using this industry wheel. And we can see that, you know, a big chunk of the resources are in health. I don't know, what's purple? Purple is manufacturing, information or IT, scientific, technical services. So you can actually browse. So if you can click on any part of the wheel and it starts drilling down. But you can also just browse by material type, credential type, institution, industry sector. So everything in here is CC BY licensed. And that was the license Department of Labor specified. So they chose the most permissive license. Like any repository, it's a bit ugly, right? You see the data card for the resource, but then is this a bunch of honking files that have been uploaded, right? You don't get to see it in the full academic context in which it's really used by an instructor. You then, if you think you're interested, you have to download it, and then you open it, and then you can look at it, and some of it is really fantastic, and some of it isn't, and so then it becomes sifting through the crap to get to the really good stuff. And the group that's running Skills Commons, yeah, I've been working with them quite a bit to try to find ways to bring to the top some of the best stuff. And so you can actually now start to see by showcases some of the better materials that are in Skills Commons. And you can see we're starting to create communities around collections. So I just wanted to mention that because that's an important thing to consider. Where will the resources go? If you're going to go open and create a whole bunch of open stuff, how will you distribute it? How will people find it? Where will they go? Okay. So, yes, good. Sure, yeah, this is just like a Google Doc. I'll send it to Rajiv and he can put it somewhere or distribute it to you, whatever you like. This is a big, huge question, and I was like, oh my God, how am I going to answer this in like a minute? But I wanted to highlight just a few things that I see as emerging in this space around the use of Creative Commons licenses in both the teaching and scholarship side. On the teaching side, I've highlighted just very briefly open pedagogy. And by open pedagogy, I was talking about it a little bit earlier, it's like how do you leverage the openness of the resource pedagogically? How does it change teaching and learning? That is like an amazing question to ask. I think very few, if hardly anybody is doing it, but I think that it's a hugely important area and very exciting. The examples that you see and hear about are really exciting. And David Wiley, who writes Open Content blog, I've put a couple of links to his blog posts about open pedagogy because he's doing a really good job of defining what it is and how it might work. His big idea is, can we move away from disposable assignments? These are assignments we give students, multiple choice, true, false, some stupid thing that we hate marking, they hate doing. We give them their mark back. What do they do with that assignment? Into the garbage. Can we move away from disposable assignments and have them create assignments that are open and serve some practical benefit for the world that we could all learn from and be able to make use of? And so it's actually a very interesting flip on what might constitute an effective assignment for students. And there's several examples associated with that. Oh, and you can see I'm supposed to meet with the okay. Curation, I think, is a growing important thing to think about. And I'm really I think it's fantastic that librarians are getting involved, because there's a growing vast amount of open content out there. How do we decide what of all that stuff is high quality, is usable in our academic context for our institution? And I think that a group of people need to take on the curation role. And I think in many ways librarians are perfect for that, because that's what you're so good at. But I think it should be done collaboratively with the faculty. And so the fact that here in BC there is a group called the OER Librarians, and they're working on things like LibGuides, I think is awesome. We need way more of that. I'd love to see in every library a section in the stacks that says open content for the courses and curricula at this institution. And you can just browse it. I mean, that's physical resources. It obviously could be digital too.
Just so you know, we are looking at the possibility of getting those texts on, partly for students, but partly also for other faculty to see them.
Awesome.
So that it's not a dangerous thing to have in your hand. And, it's okay.
I'm on fire.
Yeah, that's right.
I just ordered one.
Okay.
Oh, good. Excellent, yeah. And the Open Textbook Network, some of you may have heard of this. So this is looking at forming a coalition of institutions and organizations who are all interested in open textbooks, and forming a network of them all collectively so that they can talk to each other, plan together, coordinate together. If you're not part of the Open Textbook Network, I encourage you to think about becoming part.
There are no Canadian people involved in the Open Textbook Network.
But
institutionally?
There could be, though.
There could be. We've inquired, and we're both as close to
Okay, great. Super. I think BC Campus is going to become a thing. And then on the scholarship and research side, I mean, I just want to point out that Canada's tri-agency, you know, like SHRC and NSERC, they've all now said that research money must be used in an open access way, right? So it's become open policy for research funding to be tied to the requirement to take the results of your research and make them open to all Canadians who essentially paid for them. That was not always the practice, but now as a tri-agency policy that has been done by our 3 big funders in Canada. They don't explicitly say Creative Commons, but essentially in the open access space, that is the main vehicle, the main way in which research is being made open. And so, to the extent that your institution's involved with doing research, I think it's really, you know, it's almost like the funder has mandated it, you know, and so there's the resistance, I think, resistance is futile. Rajiv talked about academic freedom earlier. I want to emphasize that. I think that openness in terms of textbooks, but other resources as well, is inherently an enabler of academic freedom. The right to remix and revise things yourself is like a significant improvement over, you know, what were often very closed resources. But I also think customization, localization, we talked briefly about teaching and learning innovation, and the guy that was just talking to Rajiv and I, who's no longer here, he was talking about, he doesn't even use textbooks anymore. And so I think there's a lot of interesting activity going on around reimagining the notion of a textbook. The idea that every course needs to have one of these, or even what one of these is in a digital sense, is starting to be, there's some interesting innovation happening there. We're coming down to just a few more minutes. This was a question that was submitted, and I read this question a whole bunch of times, and I'm not sure I understood it, but I did come up with an answer from my point of view. So this is talking about openness in the context of learning support. I wasn't quite sure what people were thinking there, but when I think of learning support, I think about not necessarily what's happening in the class, but all the student services that surround that, right? And so to what extent might Creative Commons licenses and openness be used and applicable within that larger surrounding space? And I'd just say that in the Department of Labor initiative that I was talking about a few minutes ago, the CC BY open licensing requirement applied to all new curricula that you created, but also all resources that you created. So if you think about student recruitment material, they have this notion of coaching in the context of that program, all the coaching guides. You know, those are not materials used in the classroom, but they're kind of program support, student support, learning support materials. All of those are being openly licensed as well. And so when you browse the collection in Skills Commons, you can browse by program support materials, not just by academic curricula materials. And there's tons of stuff in there, including things like this, which is like a visual depiction of a stacked and latticed credential associated with energy. So, you know, first students have to learn personal effectiveness, then there's some basic academic requirements, some workplace requirements. These are coming from national existing programs that are being made into OER, and then on top of that are stacked particular credentials. So there's very interesting academic thinking materials being made available as well. This is a simple answer. And this is kind of a prelude to a conversation I'll have with the librarians, but we've committed as an organization to create a Creative Commons certificate. This is not something we've ever done before, but essentially when the Department of Labor committed $2 billion and said everything has to be CC BY, you know, then they said, well, none of our colleges know anything about that. Can Creative Commons come in and help us, help the colleges? And so we said, yes, of course. But we're a tiny organization. We can't do that everywhere around the world. So, and also the Department of Ed in the US now is going CC BY with all their grant programs, and so is the State Department. And so as the proliferation and adoption of that requirement spread across other departments, they asked us to train up their own staff. They didn't want to have to rely on a third-party external provider. They want to have that knowledge and expertise internal to the departments. So we committed to doing a certificate for government staff and for educators, and then the Institute for Museum and Library Services asked us to also do one for librarians. And put up matching funding. So we actually have funding to create these certificates, and I'll talk in more detail about that, but there will be a whole curriculum and program associated with Creative Commons that looks at everything from what is the commons to copyright to cultural issues to technical implementation and legal issues, and there'll be specific learning paths for government librarians and educators. So I won't show that to you because it's huge. If you want to find OER, here's a bunch of places where you can find it. We have our own license chooser. It's not particularly great for the license chooser is one thing, getting a license, and then finding OER, here's 3 places you can go to find OER. We're out of time.
Pretty much out of time.
Yeah, see, I could have talked all day.
But I think it's likely that, and I hope that people will want to keep engaging you in a conversation about questions that may arise even after today.
Totally.
So I don't know if you can splash up type in your email address or your Twitter handle.
Sure.
But while you're doing that, also I wanted to ask you if Eva would mind sharing.
Sure, I have just 4 things to tell you about. One is that there's a brochure in the back of the Jeff it's got the URL for open.bccampus.ca where you'll find the receive open textbook collection. And also, very important, there's a call for proposals for faculty and staff at secondary institutions, and you can get funding for developing open education resources. It's a matching kind of proposal, so you come forward and have BC Campus will provide a grant if you're successful, and then your institution will need to match the amount. And then we also have a call for proposals for development and resources. So that's available on the site. in June, and it's called Festival of Learning. And you can find more about it at festival.bccampus.ca. And I think that's it.
Well,
It's touching.
Yay, Levi.
I want to say that, I think I'm sort of speaking on behalf of Quantum a little bit over here, but I think BC Campus has been a tremendous partner for this institution, and I think it's because of the strength of that partnership that, what was it, a month ago, we were recognized for having surpassed 100 course adoptions for open textbooks, the first institution in BC to do so, hopefully not the last. But I just want to thank again you, Leva, and the BC Campus through you as well for supporting this event, and especially Paul for, I feel like we spent a lot of time together.
I know.
But, for sharing your time and your expertise.
No, pleasure.
So really, thank you
you're
very
welcome.
much. Please join me. Thank you.